Okay. Hello and welcome. My name is Austin Francis Sylvest, and I'm a destination wedding and elopement photographer and videographer based in Colorado. I exclusively shoot in Colorado, Iceland, and New Zealand. But today we're going to be talking a little bit more about Iceland. And just know this is definitely going to be a little bit longer form of a video. It's definitely going to be very laid back. I'm basically just going to sit here and talk about getting married in Iceland and what that entails, what to expect, a few things to consider based off of my experiences there. And just know too, if you are interested in booking me or just learning a little bit more about eloping in Iceland or New Zealand, or Colorado, just know that you can always follow the link to my website if you're not already there, hit the contact form, and once you get there, there's going to be a form to where you fill out a little bit of information. It'll probably take you about 1 or 2 minutes. It's super easy to do. And then once you submit it, it'll forward you to a confirmation page that'll also give you some more information. But just know too that I'm an open book. My main goal is to help you create a wedding day that you're actually excited about, something that's really tailored to who you are, to your journey, and just really celebrates that journey and just reflects your life together. So I guess, just to get started, if it also too at any point you are looking for a specific section or something, I know some of this might not be relevant to everybody. So just go down to the YouTube description and follow those links, the timestamp codes, and that'll take you to exactly where you want to go to. And I would highly suggest using that if you're looking for something very specific here, because this video might be a little bit longer. But just to get started, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the best time to get married in Iceland. And I think I'll just probably run through the seasons here for you. And also too, just so you know, you can go to my website. I have a lot of free resources that are written out instead of video form, if that's easier for you. This exact one would be called Eloping in Iceland. So if you just go to resources and then to Iceland, it'll be under there for you. But to get started, let's just talk about spring elopements. Typically, this is early April through May. And really, Iceland is just kind of coming out of the ice in the cold. You'll still experience some snow potentially, but for the most part, it's going to be pretty nice. It might be a little bit cooler for you if you're from the southern United States or, different part of Europe that's a little bit more south. And if you're used to a warmer climate or a more humid climate, it might still be a little bit cold for you. But it's nothing that a simple jacket, won't be able to fix. Oh, sorry, my cat is scratching in the background. Usually there will be a few days of extreme weather, whether it be wind, snow, different stuff kind of like that. But for the most part, the later you get into that range, the less you're going to run into that problem. And honestly, a lot of times I would suggest like late April, like the last week of April, first couple weeks of May. It's absolutely beautiful. You're going to start to see a lot more greenery. The days are going to be a little bit longer. But I think one of the main things that I really enjoy about the time of the year there is that the crowds aren't nearly as big, so you don't have to fight anybody off necessarily, or you don't have to worry about the bigger tour buses showing up at different locations. But for the most part too, with a lot of the couples that book me, if you want to go to a larger location that's a lot more popular, we can do that. But for the most part, we're going to try to find you a location that's a little bit more off the beaten path that you can actually have a little bit of privacy with, whether it's just you two or your family. So with that being said, I think it's a really great time. Let's see if I have any other notes here. That's basically it for spring. It's a really beautiful time. You're going to start to see some wildflowers at the end of it, and then kind of like switching over now into summer. You're going to see, especially in June or late May, you're going to see a lot of the lupins. You're going to see just a lot more greenery, and it's really, really pretty. And also too, along with that, you're going to get the midnight sun, which is, of course, probably one of the biggest reasons that a lot of people go to Iceland in the summer. And basically what that is, you're getting somewhere between, 18 to 22 hours of daylight in a lot of cases. But just know too that with that, the crowds are a bit larger, but there's also ways to get around that. One of the big things to consider when doing it, or when getting married that time of the year, in Iceland, is to just start your day a lot later. Like for instance, if the sun is going to go down at midnight or 1 a.m., plan on your coverage ending at 1:30 a.m. I know that might sound a little bit crazy, but at the end of the day, the sunset and sunrises last a little bit longer, so you're going to have some really, really pretty light. So I would highly suggest for any wedding or elopement, regardless of location, you want to be out at the best lighting times, and Iceland is kind of a cheat code when it comes to that in the summer, just because you get so much of it. And then also too, since it's later in the day, a lot of people are going to sleep, kind of missing out on that. So it's a really great time just to be able to go out and kind of have the whole place to yourself, but the sun's still up. It's kind of crazy. But yeah, so just be aware of that with the crowds, but also too, like there's ways around it. It's a really, really pretty time. And you're going to get a lot of that greenery. You're going to see a lot more of the water flowing at its highest highest levels. Like some of the waterfalls are going to be at their peak as far as like the runoff goes from it. They're going to feel more powerful. It's just a really pretty time. But let's switch over now. We're going to go into fall. Typically this is August through late October. Some people, it's questionable whenever you get to October, because the weather can change on you pretty quick just because of the changing of seasons. So for instance, there's a lot of higher winds. There's a lot more rainstorms, sudden snowstorms, different stuff like that. But for the most part, it's really pretty, and you're also getting into another time of the year too, to where the landscape is changing from that green in August to, by the time you get to October, it's that very golden brown color. And for me personally, I really like that a lot. I think it's very beautiful. I think I think it goes great with photos and videos. It just has a really great feel to it. But just know that whenever you go that time of the year as well, with the temperature drops and all that, you do need to be a little bit more prepared with the clothes that you bring with you. Like for instance, anytime you go to Iceland, like one of the most common things that you should bring with you is a windbreaker rain jacket. That's just kind of a non-negotiable. But especially whenever you get into that time, you're also going to need maybe just a little bit heavier of a jacket in case it gets cooler. But also just know too, this is also a really great time to get married in Iceland, simply because the travel starts to drop off and gets a little bit cheaper. Usually around mid-September is when it drops off. So I know I'm speaking here a lot from terms of the United States, just because that's where I'm currently based. But if you're from Europe, it's kind of cheap to fly there all the time. If you're in the U.S., it's typically going to be during this time range, somewhere around, $600 to $900, depending on what part of the country you're in. So usually you can find some deals. Like for instance, one of the times that I went in October, I was able to find a round trip flight from Denver, Colorado, directly to Reykjavik in, I think it was $400 or something like that. So it's definitely a good time just to consider, because the prices are a little bit cheaper as well. So now kind of hopping into winter, you need to be a little bit more careful about what you're trying to plan in the winter, because a lot of locations are going to be closed. A lot of parts of the country are going to be closed just because of the ice and snow and just general weather that can turn on, like a dime. I'm recording this in May of 2023. And as of right now, the weather is fine over there, but there have been at least 4 days that I've seen so far that the airport completely shut down, mainly due to ice, bad winds, things kind of like that. In addition to that, you kind of have to be prepared for more extreme temperature. You have to be prepared for more extreme temperatures, but also just more extreme conditions along the road. For instance, if you don't know how to drive in snow, or if you're not used to it, I probably wouldn't suggest going at this time of the year to start. just because you might be met with conditions that you've never been in that might, potentially be a little bit, unsteady. Because the last thing you want to do is be the tourist that, drives on ice and then the car goes off the road. Now you're stuck paying for a rental car and all that kind of stuff. But if you do, I would suggest sticking around Reykjavik. It's still really beautiful that time of year. There's a lot of stuff that's still going to be open, but just know that the further away you get, the more harsh those conditions are going to be, and there's sometimes that the roads will just completely shut down, like the government will shut them down just for safety reasons, and you could potentially be trapped somewhere for a couple days. So just know that, and just kind of consider that beforehand. But I do know some people like to get married there this time of the year just because things are a little bit cheaper, just because they might have their pick of where they can stay without having any issues. And I mean, it is really beautiful, don't get me wrong, it is, but those are just a couple things to consider, because, for instance, if you're from, like Canada or somewhere that experiences a little bit more extreme cold, this probably isn't anything too far out of the ordinary for you. But if you're from somewhere like the southern United States or the southwestern United States, it's definitely going to be a bit different, and I would consider it. So next up, I'm just going to talk a little bit about, finding a location. Like, where do you actually want to get married in Iceland? There's a lot of noticeable land features, which I'm sure you're very aware of. You have waterfalls, glaciers, you have some of the black sand beaches, which are truly one-of-a-kind kind of places that I would highly, highly suggest checking out. There's also a number of them. Some are a little bit different than others. Some feature big mountain views. Some are just really pretty coastline. Just give you like a very wide view. It's really pretty. But I will say here in this section, I don't have any particular lean or sway to locations that we shoot at or different stuff like that. For me personally, I really enjoy just helping you figure out a day that you're really excited about. So I also don't really suggest that if you book me that we're just going to be hopping to location to location to location. I'd probably say let's focus on just a few and go from there. Also too, one of the ways that I work in Iceland is if you book me, you're going to receive 13 hours of coverage over 2 days as a minimum. The reason for that being is that, I don't want us to rush around. Like, I want you to be able to have your wedding day. I want it to be able to be relaxed and you can do the things that you want to do, but I don't want us to also be in the car all day. That's one of the biggest concerns that I have with a lot of elopements. Some people just really want to cram a lot of different locations or things into a short amount of time. So that just allows us to kind of take a little bit of a breather, break it up into 2 days to where you don't feel like you have to do everything all at once. But also too, when I said 13 hours over 2 days, just know that if you get to like the winter or the fall months to where the daylight is definitely a good bit under that, and that's the date that you really want, just know that I can customize something out a little bit more for you. But one of the things that I do help with couples as far as finding a location that you really enjoy or you really want is if you were to book with me, for instance, so you reach out, we hop on a call, you're like, that's our guy, and then you want to hire me, I'll send over the contract, you pay the retainer. After all that's taken care of, one of the first things that I'll do is send you over a questionnaire. And basically what it does is just allow me to get to know you a little bit more personally, but also just learn a lot more about your day and what you truly want in it. So for instance, like a lot of that will be like, what kind of place do you want to stay in? Do you have a vision for that? Do you have any sort of location that you do have in mind, or some sort of setting that you would like to say your vows at, or, whatever it might be? That's something that I'll really help you figure that out. But just, kind of surface level, those are the 4 types of locations that I listed earlier that you're going to find in Iceland the most often. There's lots of waterfalls. There's over 10,000. I don't even think there's probably more than that. Some of them are as high as 700 feet. Some of them are a little bit more of a cascading feel to it. But whatever it is, or, I guess too, for like glaciers, there's lots of different types. You have the glacier lagoon. You just have, big views to where you can stand on the side of the mountain and check it out. And then we were talking about the black sand beaches earlier with just some of them have big cliffs and mountains in the back. Some of them are just very wide open, and just give you a really pretty view of the coastline. So yeah, that's just a few things to consider as far as location goes, and just some of the ways that I'll actually help you figure that out. Another thing worth mentioning here is that along with that location scouting and finding your location, I do have a interactive map that I created myself that includes a lot of different layers as far as different types of locations, but also too different experiences, whether it be like an ice cave or a tour or something like that. But also in addition, it has housing listed out as well, to where you can just toggle it and see exactly places to stay that are close to your location, so you don't have to necessarily, zoom in on Google or click on every single one, or like feel the pressure of having to sit there at a map and figure it out. I've already done a lot of that work for you, so all you really have to do is just hop in there, find a location or two that you really love, and then the rest of it will really just fall together pretty easily. But after finding locations and all that stuff, one of the things that I'll help you do for your Iceland wedding or elopement, and I guess something else worth mentioning too, is I don't have any sort of bias towards weddings or elopements. I love both of them. Typically you'll find me shooting stuff that has less than 50 people, and most Iceland things are pretty small. A lot of people will bring like family members, like their parents or their brothers, sisters, a couple friends, maybe something like that. That's pretty common. But I don't have any sort of bias towards that. If you like my work and you feel like I'm a good resource to you, definitely still reach out to me. I'd love to hear from you. But just to jump into how exactly we'd plan your day, how exactly you could go about, having your day there. So let me actually, I'm going to take a minute here. Excuse me for the delay, but I'm actually going to pull up a timeline. Let's see. And this will be from one of my current couples. Okay, yeah. So, like I said before, there's a lot of different things that you can do in Iceland. I highly suggest for a lot of couples to have that sense of adventure. That's why a lot of people are going. Have that sense of, hey, we really want to go experience something new together. But whatever that might be, whether it's out in the mountains, on the coastline, or whether it's just in a city, there's a lot of really cool stuff that you can do that's laid back, that feels authentic to you. Like for instance, I have one couple that is going into the city for half the day, and they're going to stay there, and then we're going to go back up to their Airbnb, and they're going to cook dinner together and just kind of hang out a little bit, spend some time, read some letters to one another. And then also too, like there's other couples who just really like to have an Airbnb that's a little bit more secluded out of the city, and they're like, hey, we want to wake up and go to the waterfall, and then we're going to come back, we're going to make breakfast, hang out for a little bit, and then sometimes we'll take a break, and then meet back up later in the evening whenever the light's really good again, and we can just kind of go from there. But some of the things that you can do, as far as just to give you some specific examples, as far as experiences go, one of the things that a lot of couples like to do is a little bit of a hike. Also too, just another note, straight up, I do not have any bias towards whether you want to hike or not. There's a lot of people who look at weddings like this and they're like, I really want to get married in that place or that location, but I just don't want to hike. That's totally okay. I honestly, in most cases, I would prefer not to hike, just because I feel like in some cases, if you're a couple that doesn't do that on a regular basis anyway, or if that doesn't feel like a very authentic thing to you, it isn't going to match well. It's not going to mesh very well. So that's something that I would probably prefer you to find a spot that, maybe you just have that time in the car together to where you're not having to, stress about hiking to a spot or being tired. You can actually just go and just enjoy some time together instead of having to worry about that stress. But also too, the more time we spend hiking, typically the less time that you're going to have me actually filming or photographing you. So that's just kind of another thing to consider. Yeah, I mean, it's a thing. It's definitely a trend. I will say that. So don't feel like you have to hike to have a wedding or an elopement like this. That's definitely not the case. I'm here for whatever. I'll help you figure out what you want. If you want to hike, that's awesome. If you don't want to hike, that's also awesome. So just know that. But another big thing too, like I mentioned earlier, is I would highly suggest just kind of experiencing the local culture. Whether that's, something very Icelandic, like there's a lot of different museums, there's a lot of different, like really good restaurants, depending on which part of the country you're in. But yeah, just really kind of diving into that and just kind of experiencing something new together. I think that's one of the biggest things that a lot of couples that are having smaller weddings or elopements can do together or with their families, is just to experience something new together. I feel like that's the most memorable way to do things, to where you're building that new memory together, to where it's something that's just uniquely you that you did on your wedding day or in your wedding day experience. So that's what I would probably say for that section. Another thing that a lot of couples really like are more so like the excursion type things. There's anything from, let's see what I have here, private helicopter tours. They'll take you up to some different mountain spots. Or there's a lot of really good off-roading options to where if you want to rent like a 4x4 car and say like, hey, we're going to drive to this location that looks really cool, and just kind of experience that together, or just kind of like check it out as a family or something like that. There's also other things such as like snowmobiling on glaciers, private boating tours that'll take you to different islands or just along the coastline that normally you couldn't see otherwise. But also, yeah, there's just a lot of other things kind of like that. You have a lot of ice caves in the winter, and there's some different skiing options too, in the winter time, if that's your thing. But yeah, I would just highly suggest checking out some of those options as well. That's something that I don't really push couples to do if it doesn't feel authentic to you. Excuse me. You also don't have to do that on your wedding day. A lot of the times I will help you figure out, like if you have the 2-day coverage option, what exactly did you want to do with that? And then that way you can have more of a traditional wedding day if you want it, but also you still have some time to go out and get, just have some fun together, and I can just be there to document that on another day to where there's no pressure to have to get dirty or whatnot. Another thing some couples like to do is just backpacking. There's a lot of huts, whether you drive to them in car camp or whether you hike to them, totally up to you. But it's another really good option because there's a lot of really beautiful places that you can get to, both by car and by foot. So some couples have really enjoyed doing that as well. So that's just another thing to kind of check out. Another thing that we're going to kind of hop into next is traveling to Iceland. I know I mentioned a couple of things about this before, about, as far as like getting there, booking flights and stuff like that. From my experience, typically the most expensive time that it's going to cost you to fly to Iceland, regardless of where you are in the world, is probably going to be in the summer, just because the demand's there. They know they can sell the tickets. The cheaper times that you're going to find are going to be that April through probably the first week of June, if not a little bit earlier into May. You're going to be able to find some cheap flights. Like, for instance, if you're coming from the U.S., you'll probably be able to find something that's somewhere in the $450 to $650 range round trip. If you're coming from Europe, for instance, I've seen flights from the UK for about, I think it was 150 quid or something like that. So, I mean, pretty cheap for the most part. If you're in Europe, it's definitely way easier to get there and way cheaper. But if you're coming from the US, definitely check out early summer. Summer, if you really want it, go for it. It's totally worth it. I will say that. And then also, if you're looking for like the cheaper range of things, again, I would probably say the fall. probably between mid-September and mid-October. That way you kind of miss most of the extreme weather, but you also still get, to spend some really great time there as well, with some light. Another thing to consider is getting around Iceland. This is kind of a controversial topic for some people, but they do have public transit that goes from the international airport to Reykjavik itself if you want to do that, or if you're just kind of, not really going too far. But for the most part, renting a car is pretty standard. One of the things to consider when renting a car in Iceland, just to kind of be aware of, is that you might want to just, regardless of where you're going, just get a 4-wheel drive vehicle. It's really not that much more expensive, but you'll have the option to at least go on some of the F-roads. And what F-roads are basically just gravel roads that are off the beaten path, essentially. There's only a few of them that you have to have like a higher clearance vehicle for. And also, too, there might be some of them that you get to that there's a river crossing, which is very common in Iceland, that you won't be able to cross on even if you have the 4x4 just because of the water. But you can at least go on those roads, because if I'm not mistaken, it is illegal to go on an F-road if you don't have a 4x4 vehicle. So that's just something to consider, just so you have the option. I want to say it's only about maybe $25 to $50 more per day, US dollars that is. Depending on what kind of car you rent, where you get it from. Also, another thing too, considering in Iceland, if you're from the US, and because I know in Europe a lot of manual standard cars are very common, in the US not as much. There's a lot of automatic vehicles. So if you go rent a vehicle and you see the cheapest option, the odds are it is not an automatic vehicle. It is probably going to be a standard stick shift. So if you don't know how to do that, be very aware that whenever you go to book it, make sure that if you want an automatic vehicle that it says automatic on it, because it's not always so straightforward with it, and you definitely don't want to look like a fool like me with one of the times that I went, showed up, didn't realize it, and am sitting there trying to figure out how to drive a stick shift car when I've never driven one before, even though I'd driven a tractor, like a long time ago. That was stick shift. I knew how at least it worked, but it's definitely not as straightforward as it seems if you don't have to practice with it. And you don't necessarily want to try to practice learning how to drive that while you're there. So just be aware of that. Another thing too is getting gas there. When you are getting gas in Iceland, you need a card that has a PIN number. So if you're in the US, I don't know how it works in Europe, but in the United States, if you have a bank account, you probably have a debit card. Bring your debit card with you, and know your PIN number, because whenever you go to get gas at the pump itself, you're going to have to put that in. If you have a credit card and you put it in there and it asks you for a PIN and you don't have one, it's as simple as you're not going to be able to get gas at the pump itself, especially after hours, because some of these places will close a little bit earlier. One of the things that you can do is they have, especially at In stations, which are probably the most common gas station in Iceland, you can get a prepaid card on the inside. So I would suggest whenever you get there to find an In station, if your car isn't full of gas already, fill it up with gas at the pump, but then go inside and buy one of the prepaid In cards. And basically what that will do is just cover you, because you never know even if you have your PIN and all that, you don't want to get stuck in a spot where you can't get gas because of your card. So that's a pretty foolproof way that you can know that you're going to have it. And then of course, the day before you leave, just start using that prepaid card and just pay it, finish it off before you leave. But that's just something to consider and just something to be aware of, because if you have a credit card and you try to use it at the pump, and your credit card doesn't have a PIN, which most of them don't, at least in the US, you're probably not going to be getting gas. So just be aware of that. Another thing too is accommodations. A lot of couples really love camping. There's a really great van rental system in Iceland to where you can pretty much have everything you need, from a bed to a stove and all that kind of stuff. There's also a lot of really great campgrounds around Iceland. They're just really beautiful spots. They're very easy to book, but just make sure that if you are going to go that route, you try to book them as soon as possible, because they can fill up. especially some of the ones that are in more scenic locations. It's definitely a really good idea to look into that beforehand. But just know too, with these three things, whether it be flights or finding a car or accommodations, that's something that I can help you with. And like I said before, I won't book those things for you, but I will make sure that you have all the options that best fit you and fit your price range, all that kind of stuff. And then I can walk you through that process up until the booking point and be like, hey, now it's time for you to go book it yourself. So it's all in your name, it's all in your system, your card and all that. So that's how that works. But I don't provide you with the service of actually booking those things, but I will give you all the resources you need to make a very well-informed decision and the best decision possible for you. So the next section is actually getting married in Iceland. If you're from the US, it's definitely going to be slightly harder than if you live in Europe just because of some legality stuff. But this is something that I will include in the planning portal that I provide with every couple that books with me, along with all that other information that I mentioned earlier. So I'm just going to pull up the guide really quick in front of me so I can take a look at it and kind of explain it to you. But here, actually, where is it? This is the issue with doing stuff like this, to where I'm not going to necessarily edit it, to where you're going to have a little bit of me fumbling around here trying to find my stuff. All right, so here we go. So the first thing that you're going to need is a certificate of marital status. And this is where things get a little bit tricky if you're from the US, because there's nowhere technically that you can go to get this. Also too, this must be issued to you within 8 weeks of your wedding. So if you do it before that 8-week time period, they're not going to accept it. Let's see, there's a couple different options that you have if you're from the US, because if you go to your clerk, county recorder, and you ask for this, most of them are probably going to be kind of like, what are you talking about? I don't really know what that is. There's a couple different things that you can do. I've done a lot of different research online, and some of my couples before have asked specific questions to their areas. And that's something else too, like I can help you figure it out a little bit more as we get to it if need be. But for the most part, like for instance, one of the couples from New York, a certificate of no record of a marriage was accepted. That's what was asked for in New York, and it worked for them. I've also been told too that some counties can issue you a letter of single status, which is a little bit different than non-marital. Basically, they'll just check their records and say like, hey, we don't see this person has been married. I mean, it's the same thing, it's just a different wording essentially. So that's kind of the issue with some of the stuff in the US here is that you're going to run into. It's not that they don't have it, it's just that there's a different or very specific wording, and a lot of the wordings are very different from, county to county, state to state. So, also, too, there was another couple that said, I'm quoting them specifically, said, I asked about this. They said, if you go to the register with 2 witnesses that know you weren't married before, there's a form you can sign to prove no previous marital status. So that's another option as well. But one of the things that I would suggest doing is, just emailing the correct people. And that's something I'll have all the links in the planning portal for you. If you wanted to go this route, because also too, something else to consider is you don't actually have to get legally married in Iceland. A lot of couples will get married in the state or country that they're from beforehand or after, and then just have like more of a ceremonial type deal, and then just take care of the legalities back home to where you don't have to go through any extra hoops. You don't have to bring any documents with you, different stuff kind of like that. So that's something else to consider as well. So for that, you're going to need that certificate of marital status. You're also going to need to submit a marriage notification form a minimum of 3 weeks out. It's very simple to do. I'll give you a link to it. And then original birth certificates, and then copies of passports. And that's basically all you need. There are some things that couples don't necessarily want to bring all those documents with them, and I don't blame you one bit. You don't want to have to worry about, important original documents, on your wedding day or, like on a trip. across the country, or out of the country, stuff like that. So in a lot of cases, I do suggest that couples just get married back home before or after. One thing that you can do, this is kind of on the down low, because I don't really know the full thing of it, but a lot of states in the United States will issue you a marriage license and say, hey, you just have to bring it back within 60 days. So what you can do is take it out of the country with you, sign it, date it there, do that, and then return it when you get back home. I have no idea about legalities of stuff like that, so this is not legal advice at all, disclaimer. But that's something that a lot of couples can do, or it's just an option to consider. But I would do a little bit of research on that, just for your specific state, because I know there's some that don't really care that much, but some might legal wise. So like if we're in the future, if anything ever happened, and you don't want to be not legally married just because of a technicality. So just check into that for your specific state or your specific country just to see first. But at the very least, doing it or signing it before you leave or after you get back is a really great option. It's very seamless, and it won't take anything away from your day, to be honest. No couple that has ever done that with me has expressed any sort of disappointment or a different feeling. It's still your wedding day. It's still the day that you commit to one another. It just happens to be that the legal side of it was taken care of before or after. All right, so I'm just going to kind of break down some of the cost here, as far as what you can expect to spend on an Iceland elopement or wedding. On the low end, I'd probably say expect, this is for your entire trip, and hypothetical 5-day trip with just photography. Most couples are spending somewhere between $99.50 to $1,580. That's a pretty common number. Considering most weddings in the United States are on average about $30K. I mean, you're getting a lot more out of it. You're getting a trip, plus time with your closest family members and friends. Plus you're getting, a good quality of planning services to go along with it. So that's just kind of like the lower range of what I see couples typically spend. I'd probably say on average though, somewhere between $17,500 to $24,000 is pretty common. Just because a lot of couples might still want to rent out like a small venue, or they might want to spend a little bit more money on an Airbnb that they can enjoy together or use for their ceremony. Or they just want to, splurge a little bit and just have a little bit of fun with it instead of, spending all that money on, dinner for 300 people. They're like, hey, we're just allocating funds. Sorry, I messed that up. But you're just kind of like spending your money in a different way. So that's something that's pretty common. And then high end, I'm seeing somewhere between around $28,000 to $45,000. And again, it's just kind of a mix of things. The things that I'm including, at least for these numbers, would be photography, videography, your flights, your car rental. That could be a big factor too, if I'm being honest with you. For instance, like if you want to rent like a bigger type car, like you've probably seen a Defender before or something like that. Pretty common if you just like go to Instagram, type in Iceland, that you're probably going to see one within the first 9 pictures that you see. But those can be somewhere around, $300 to $400 a day potentially. Some people like to rent those for their entire trip just because it's fun and you can go pretty much anywhere. So that's something that for some couples is a really big cost, and just because they really want to do that. It's something that's really fun, and it's an experience. But another thing is lodging, and that's another thing that you can definitely spend a good bit on, because there's a lot of really unique places to stay in Iceland, especially if you're going in the winter. They have some glass houses that allow you to, just have a full view of the aurora while you're out there, just all night long. So, I mean, there's a lot of really cool stuff there, a lot of really modern stuff that's where a lot of this price kind of goes up a little bit. And then, of course, you have different details, kind of like flowers, makeup, decorations, stuff kind of like that. Typically, a lot of couples aren't really using that too much, though, because, they feel like, hey, we're in Iceland. It's already beautiful enough. I don't really want to spend a lot of money on that. I'd rather spend it on something else. That's something that's very common, too. And then other expenses, of course, because, of course, Iceland is not a cheap place to go by any means. It can be done affordably, but I would say, anywhere between $250 to $450, or, way more than that, depending on how big of a spender you are. Just on things like food, gas, whatnot, because food is definitely more expensive. Gas is very expensive. If you're in the US, it's about $9 a gallon, even though they go by liters there. It kind of roughly comes out to around $8 to $9 a gallon. So if you can imagine driving a lot, or you have a longer trip, or you're going on some of these back roads that might take up more gas, it's going to add up fairly fast. A typical full tank of gas is somewhere between $100 and $150, depending on what kind of vehicle you have. So just be prepared for that, and just know that. But at the end of the day, you're there for a reason. So just be, it's worth it in the end. But yeah, let's see if I have anything else for you. I think that's about it as far as just kind of a general overview goes. One thing that I will say is just kind of my general pitch here. If you are interested in working with me or having me out to film or photograph your wedding, I do have a portfolio page on this site. It's called Films and Photographs as of right now. If you go to that on the main menu, you'll be able to see my work, and definitely some more of my Iceland work as well. I usually end up going about 3 times a year. But if one of my dates, or if your date doesn't necessarily line up with my travel date at the moment, definitely reach out to me. Let me know. I'm always, willing to add another date out there, or kind of book around it. But also too, check out some more of the resources that I have that are written. There's some good ones in there, from locations to just the beginning stages of planning and stuff kind of like that. Even though we went over a little bit of that here, you'll just be able to learn a little bit more about that in depth. But yeah, if you have any specific questions, definitely email me. Go to the contact page, fill out the form. It's super easy to do. It'll take you about 1 or 2 minutes, and then I'll be in touch within 24 hours. But yeah, just know I'm here to look after you. This is something this has been my full-time job now for almost 3 years. I've been photographing and filming weddings and elopements for 7 years, a little over 7 years now. So I've seen it all. I have a lot of resources and systems in place to really help make this an experience for you, but also do that easily, because that's one of the things I understand, that if you don't necessarily know everything about eloping or having a small wedding or planning all that out, I don't expect you to have all the answers. Just come with the ideas that you do have, and I'll help you plan it out. It'll be super easy. It'll be a lot of fun. And we'll really make it into a day that you actually enjoy and something you're super excited about. But with that too, yeah, I guess I'll see you all around. If you have any specific questions, you can put them in the comments. You can email me directly, fill out the form that way. Yeah, I'll see you all soon. I hope to see you in Iceland along with me too. So talk to you well.